Welcome, everyone. My name is Oz Karan. I'm a partner with Deloitte's Risk and Financial Advisory practice. I lead what we call our trustworthy AI services. So in that capacity, I think about all the risk and governance and controls considerations associated with these emerging technologies, AI and generative AI. And I'm joined here today with two luminaries in this field that I work very closely with. Nikki Pope, who is the head of AI and legal ethics at NVIDIA, and Alexandru Costin, vice president of generative AI and Sensei at Adobe. And we're going to take the next 40 minutes here to go through some relevant questions that we are hoping that would be understood by you as the importance of having a responsible practice to AI and generative AI technologies. But before we go there, I would love to have Nikki and Alexandru maybe introduce themselves. So Nikki, can I start with you?
Okay, sure. Is this on? Okay. My name's Nikki Pope. I am the global head of AI and legal ethics at NVIDIA. I'm a lawyer, and before joining NVIDIA, I ran the High Tech Law Institute at Santa Clara University, where my research focus was predictive algorithms used in the criminal justice system, which got me into the area of looking at AI and ethics. I don't know what else you want to know. I recently moved to Nevada from California. I will say, though, what should have taken me 22 minutes to get here took an hour and a half. So I don't know about this.
And my name is Alexandru Costin. I'm running the generative AI team at Adobe in charge of launching the Firefly models. I'm with Adobe for 23 years. I recently moved from Romania, where I was running Adobe Romania, to US, the Los Gatos area, and it took me 1 hour and 2 minutes to fly from there to here. So
Great, rub it in.
All right, so why don't we get started? So Nikki and Alexandru, one of the things that I think is a top of mind for a lot of the people in the audience is the challenge of organizations trying to balance innovation with risk management. I think we have seen some news articles out there, maybe organizations that are prioritizing one or the other and resulting in certain outcomes. How do you guys think about balancing innovation with risk management? Any examples that you can provide from your respective organizations, or what do you see in general in the industry?
It's a tough balance. From my position, I am more interested in putting the brakes on releasing products than getting them out the door as quickly as possible. I don't think innovation needs to be reined in, but I think the release of products needs to be handled in a more thoughtful process. And I guess it was last week, maybe it was yesterday, things are moving so quickly in this space. There was an announcement of a voice cloning app that has been released, and there, as far as I can tell, are no controls that will keep me from taking Andrew's voice and cloning it and then making him say whatever I want. Those are the kinds of things that I think we need to think more, be more thoughtful about with respect to risk. When should we release a product? And is it risky or reckless even to release a product just so that you can be first in the market?
great points. And at Adobe, if you think about the space we're in, content generation, content editing, document consumption, marketing, these are the big areas Adobe activates in. When we saw this wave of generative models appearing and happening, we had to go through the same thought process. Do we go fast or do we go more thoughtful to market with a product that would actually respect both our principles and make our customers happy. And in 2022, when this big revolution of generative models in open source and other companies was happening, we started to think, how do we go about it? How do we innovate fast? And how should Adobe go in and launch these generative models? And we had two big options. We had a fork in the road. Do we go out and do what everybody else was doing and train with data scraped from the internet, achieving probably better quality, more world understanding, etc.? Or do we try to find a way to train on data that is maybe a smaller set, but that is compliant and not including IP, trademark, or recognizable characters? So when we had to make that decisions, not only we reflected on what we wanted, but we also talked to our customers and we asked them, what do you want? And at the time, our customers, the artists that had their art from the internet downloaded and used to train those models, were really uncomfortable with the whole situation because they had no control, no compensation, and no consent when those models were being trained. So with both of those two criteria in mind, we've decided to train our models more thoughtfully on data we had rights to train on and that doesn't contain IP or trademark. So for us, it was a decision to move slower to some extent, but not reckless. And it paid off, even if we had a model that we've launched quite early. Last March, we launched it at our summit conference. We did it in a way that paid off because we didn't include any copyrighted content, so our model is usable commercially without adding risks for regurgitating potentially copyright IP or recognizable character. So for us, in terms of risk management, it was this trade-off of moving fast and trying to be first to market, or moving slower, taking some other types of risks, like a quality risk. Because if you train with less data, you risk of having an inferior product that might not be successful in market. So we've decided to invest more in research, invest more in data augmentation, and reduce the risk of just training with internet data. So these are the types of, as you all probably are going through your own decision processes on how to go about generative AI, I'm sure there will be similar types of decisions you can make. And at least for us, it worked really in our advantage and in our customers' advantage to do things more thoughtfully.
It feels like it's a bit of a strategic decision that each organization needs to probably make and think about, right? Is the speed to market and reaching the customers as fast as possible, is that your number one priority? Or we're potentially doing that in a more responsible and safe manner that may take a little longer?
Yeah, I would say also that you should keep in mind what your corporate objectives, what your corporate goals, what your corporate culture, your core values are. And that should really help you drive your decision of where to go with launching fast, launching right, launching slower. All of those things should play out in how you have set up your company and what values you want to have attached to your company going forward. If you make a mistake, a bad mistake, it could reflect badly on your company, and the risk to your brand and your reputation could be high. If you go out to market with a product that is not properly vetted, doesn't have the right sort of guardrails, infringes on other people's intellectual property, includes illegal content. Those are types of things that you need to keep in mind. And keep in mind, really, your brand and what your brand represents in the marketplace. This area is moving really fast. And as fast as it's moving, if you don't stop, reflect, think about what you're doing, you risk making a strategic error.
So speaking of fast versus slow, one of the variables to that is obviously who in the organization is involved in certain decisions that are being made related to these emerging technologies across the entire life cycle, from the design to development to testing to use of it. Can you guys talk a little bit about, maybe Alexandra, I'll start with you. Can you talk a little bit about who in your organization is at the table when it comes to decisions that are being made around AI and generative AI? And how did you guys go about determining who should have a seat at the table.
Yeah. So in Adobe in general, the way we launch these AI capabilities to the market, they start in Adobe Research. So we have a research organization. They go out and they create these models. They refine them in the labs. And when they're ready, they tech transfer them. We call this process tech transfer. They tech transfer them to one of the product apps, like the Photoshop team, for example. And then that team takes it to market. And I want to make a quick parenthesis to the voice cloning example you gave, Nikki, because it actually changed how we operate at Adobe. And in 2018, I want to make it's a big parenthesis, but in 2018, we presented one of those research technologies called Voco, which was a voice cloning technology, at our annual conference as a research sneak. We showed it out there. You put in a prompt, you take somebody's voice, we generate it. And this was 2018, and the public was not ready at all. Maybe it's not ready today. At the time, the reaction we got from both media and the public was so concerning with deepfakes that we've actually had to step back. We haven't yet launched that technology, but B, we start thinking, how should we actually do AI in a more responsible way? So at the time, our chief legal and chief trust officer, Dana Rao, you might have met, he has realized that we need to start putting some processes in place to regulate internally how we build responsible AI. So he has created at the time something we call the AI Ethics Committee, which is a process where the legal department has an arm that is in charge of approving every product launch that contains powerful AI capabilities. So we've started to introduce that build it in 2019. In 2020, we got it through the first pass of validation when we started to introduce AI capabilities to Photoshop, generative capabilities in Photoshop called neural filters that had to go through that very high bar that the AI Ethics Committee set on all of us. And it was that early learnings that got us into starting to reinforce this process where every feature, every new model capability we're launching has to go through a really rigorous review process where the legal department has the say in what capabilities go out and has the say of defining the dimensions we evaluate models on in terms of reducing bias, minimizing potentially harmful content generation, training data. So one thing I have to say is that the legal department, at least in Adobe, they're basically co-partners in innovation by making sure we develop these models thoughtfully. So I would say this is one of the big process changes we've created because of that early backlash we got on our voice cloning app that got us into setting up these processes that enabled us to launch the Firefly models in a responsible way.
And NVIDIA is in a slightly different position because we don't go directly to consumers with most of our products. We create foundation models that then corporations or enterprises, even small businesses, startups, will build off of those. So they usually have to be retrained or fine-tuned with the customer's data. So we're not quite in the same position. But we also have an AI ethics committee because I look at your website and I know Dana. And we have taken the things that we have seen work at other tech companies like Microsoft and like Google, even Meta, and Adobe, and adopted those practices and those principles that work for us. One of them is an AI ethics committee, which we have. Our version of the AI ethics committee isn't looking at products specifically and approving every product, but we look at the overall impact of a technology if it's released into the marketplace. So we started looking at image generators and what could be done, how they could be misused. And before we introduced or started working with companies like Getty and Shutterstock on their models, we adapted our models to build in the types of guardrails or protections that we think would be required. And then we advise our customers likewise, the things that they can do. And so we look at, in our AI ethics committee, we consider the broader scope of what this technology might do once it's released into the marketplace. And we look at industries. So how will LLMs affect the healthcare industry? And what happens if we introduce an LLM that is a biotech or a chemical LLM? What can be done with that? And what can we do in preparation for that to shore up that model as well as we can, and to advise our customers on what they need to do as well to protect themselves from liability, to protect the society from bad actors, those sorts of things.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, what I'm hearing is the ethics committee that you guys are both referring to probably has a representative from across the organization. It's not just the legal side of the house or not just the ethics side of the house. So the message really is this is not just a single part of the organization or their mandate. It is a mandate that includes data office, legal, HR, and all the other functions and businesses that probably
It's a great point, yeah. In our case, the legal department hosts this, but it invites domain experts across the board. And so that's one key area. The other one that's very important that maybe I want to double down on is data. Making sure you have a process, a rigorous process for data cataloging, data lineage, data versioning, data filtration. Data is what makes these models stick, and if your data is garbage in, garbage out, whatever you put in the data set, that model will learn. Not only will learn that garbage, will learn to interpolate their garbage with anything else that human mind can imagine. So extremely important to reduce risk is to build up, and in our case, we built a data team that their only goal is to have data as a product for the internal groups, to prepare these data sets, high quality data sets, pre-filtered, augmented, ready for training, but also tracked for lineage version. So we know at any point in time for every model we ship, we know exactly all the images, in our case, or pieces of data, text and images that were fed into that model to train it.
Yeah, I would also add that two things. You should have a data management system. If you don't have one, you need to build one or buy one that will help you manage this process, because data comes from everywhere. And we consider three different types of data. The data that you grow yourself, you go out and you collect the data so you know where it comes from. You have the full provenance of that data. You know if consent was required and gotten. You know everything you need to know about that data. The second batch is licensed data from maybe Adobe, you know, and then again, depending on the source of that data, you may have a level of comfort about how that data was collected, who collected it, and the provenance of that. And then the third, which is the riskiest, is scraping the internet, because we all know what's out there, and when you scrape it, it all comes in. So if you're going to use those sorts of sources of data, you need to have a really good system for checking that data, cleaning that data, clearing that data. And I would pay attention to the press, read the stories. I mean, just before Christmas, there was that story from Stanford, the Stanford Internet something. David Thiel did they did the research on Lion 5B, and so now everyone who used Lion 5B has to go back and relook at that data set and make sure that they're cleaning it up from the content that's not supposed to be in there. And so having all of these processes and systems in place, if you don't have them now, get them, because that'll help you avoid some really potential risks later on.
And it's important to build that muscle, because like a fourth maybe category of data that is less in volume but very salient in information is reinforcement data. So you think about collecting the feedback loops of your users using your generative models and using them to reinforce the model. The same thing, it's called reinforcement learning. You guys might have heard about that. It is what made ChatGPT successful. This muscle of filtering out training data sets for your, even if they come from your users, you still want to filter them out and make sure they're high quality and they don't introduce garbage through the reinforcement process.
Makes sense. So maybe let's shift to the compliance side of the house and legal and compliance side of the house a little bit. Nikki, my next question is for you, given your role at NVIDIA. Obviously, we've all seen some of the developments around the regulatory developments around the EU AI Act, the White House Executive Order, or the AI Bill of Rights. How do you see these regulations impacting the adoption of these emerging technologies, and where do you see the regulation going from here?
I'm not sure the United States is actually going to have any regulation before the end of next year. I mean, we've got, this is an election year, so even though people are concerned about AI, they're probably not going to focus on it right now. The AI Act is probably the closest to becoming reality, and it still has some issues with it. I think where regulation ought to go is, well, let me take a step back. AI is a product, and there are regulations that govern products and how products affect people. And so I think a responsible way of approaching regulation is to look and see what regulations are out there. So if you're in healthcare industry, you've got a lot of regulations. You've got HIPAA, you've got COPPA, you've got, I don't even know what else. You've got a lot of regulations. If you're in transportation, you have a lot of regulations. AI is a product that is going to live in whatever industry it is, and it's going to have to comply with those regulations. So I would start there and then consider where there are gaps in the regulation and in the existing regulation, and that is where I think regulation is going to go. So one area that is rather gray is copyright. And globally, copyright is not the same. So we have fair use exception in the United States. I don't believe there is a fair use exception in the UK, in the EU. So how do you navigate that? Here, the general rulings from courts have been that using copyrighted data to train a model is a fair use. It's sort of, the analogy would be, if I was interested in physics and I read every single book on physics, and then I wrote a book on physics, I have not infringed the copyright unless I copy someone's book without attributing it to them. But I can read everything, or I can go to the museum and I can look at all the Renaissance art pictures, paintings, and then I can paint something. That's really what an AI model is. It's taking in all the information and then creating something new. In the US, that is, until a court says otherwise, fair use. In other places, it's not. And so I think you need to, and this is going to be sort of self-serving, talk to your lawyers, talk to your counsel, because they can help you navigate where these regulations might go. And as smart as everybody in this room is, there are nuances in these laws that you don't want to make a misstep on. So counsel is useful.
And I think your point about the industry or sector specification is a really important one, because what we're seeing in the US is also at the local or state level, there are certain regulations that are being put forward for certain industries as well. For example, if you're in the insurance industry in Colorado, there are certain regulations now you have to comply with from at the state level. So thinking about not just at the federal level, but the state and the local regulations as well would be an important consideration.
Yeah, and I agree with Nikki. It's a very complicated and evolving, shifting landscape in the IP area, Dana is engaging with many governments, trying to advise how we think in terms of content creation and editing. This law should change. And one of the other gray areas is style. For example, style is not even protectable under it's not protectable with IP, right? And style is what sometimes is the livelihood of a particular artist. So we're advocating for improvements to the current regulations to maybe protect style. We call it the FAIR Act, the federal anti-impersonation right, where we want to encourage the government to protect the right of a particular artist to be impersonated by using AI by somebody else, and in the same time losing their livelihood. So, but it is complicated. Our strategy was to maybe optimize towards where we think the world will go. We don't know where the world will end in terms of changing the IP law. If I'm not mistaken, the IP law in the United States it's 1978, or maybe you know better, but it's definitely not keeping up with the times. So definitely it will change over the next several years. So we're making a bet where we think the law will end, and we think it will end in a place where it will continue to protect human output and intellectual property against novel ways of abusing them. So that's our strategy so far.
So, Alexander, I'm going to go to you next with a transparency question. One of the greatest challenges of generative AI, and I know that Adobe was the founding member of the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity to help develop adaptable standards for digital provenance. Can you tell us a little bit about how Adobe and the consortium is thinking about incorporating further transparency into these in these emerging technologies, both from an input and output perspective?
Yeah, so after that 2018 incident, Dana's perspective was not only to change what we were doing internally at Adobe and make sure we develop AI responsibly, we also started to think about what's our role in reducing potential deepfakes, misinformation, and we looked at, again, the two big options that exist to protect against misinformation. One is to use technology to detect fake content, which we think it's very hard because technology, some of these models, they learn by the nature of their learning process, they learn how to circumvent detection. This is the training process. They're called GAN, generative adversarial networks, and if you create a detector for this model, the model will learn to evade the detector. So we thought at the time, 2018-19, and we still think that detecting those is very hard. And the right approach was to actually have a consortium of both content producers and content publishers that all agree to tag content with a nutrition label, or we call them content credential, a piece of metadata, cryptographic signature that describes how a piece of content was created. Because we think, like for food in US or in EU and nutrition labels, if everybody agrees that content needs to be tagged to include this content credential, it will enable the internet content consumer to at least be in control of understanding how a piece of content was created. Is this satire? Is this actual misinformation? Or this is raw photo, editorial photo? So we have already 2,000 companies that joined the Content Authenticity Initiative. This is not a business line for Adobe. It's just an initiative we're trying to help the world continue to make digital content trustworthy to some extent. And we will continue on this path, trying to attract more and more content publishers into joining this, because it is important for internet consumers to be educated that you cannot trust pixels anymore. They can be so easily generated that the only way to trust them is to have some piece of metadata guaranteeing or describing the steps taken in generating that content. And for Firefly, our models, we tag all the images generated, we tag them with a tag that says generated by AI. In Photoshop, when you add a layer or you modify a photo, we add a piece of metadata that says this was modified in Photoshop. And we also work with camera manufacturers I think Nikon is the first one that introduced content authenticity signatures in the actual firmware of the camera. So the camera tags the content and says, this is raw. I filmed this. Those photons hit my CCD, so we know that information is correct.
So on that same token, maybe let's talk about whether it's for a B2B or B2C. There's been a lot of discussions in the industry about having the right technical guardrails in place when you're utilizing these models. What do you guys see as far as those technical guardrails in the industry? How should our audience members here think about evaluating which technical guardrails are the right fit for their AI use cases as they're thinking about maybe putting more controls in place around their models?
So I would say start with the brand that you're going to be incorporating AI into, or that you're going to build bespoke AI. When I say think about the brand, I'm going to give you an example of last year's big hit, Barbie. So if Mattel was going to create a Barbie chatbot, there are certain things that Barbie should not say and conversations that Barbie should not engage in. And it's incumbent upon Mattel to identify what the area of conversation, the okay topics are for that chatbot, and then build guardrails to keep it from going into areas that are not appropriate. That's for everything. Now, the makers of Grand Theft Auto, I love to use this example because Grand Theft Auto is just way out there. The kinds of guardrails that Grand Theft Auto would have are really different from the kinds of guardrails that Barbie would have. You have to think about who's going to be using their product and your product and what kind of experience you want them to have. So if I'm playing Grand Theft Auto, I want the full experience of the profanity, the insults, the killing, the murder, all of that. If I'm interacting with Barbie, I want to talk about something completely different, probably not murder, probably not, running people over. And so that I think it's important for you to think really well and long about what that experience is you want to create for your customer, and then work backwards into what kind of guardrails you need to create or develop to build that, to have that experience, to give them that experience. And there are a lot of open source products out there that will help you. One of them is Nemo Guardrails, which is an NVIDIA open source product. You can use that. You can use any number of other products that will help you build safer AI.
Yeah, great point. And I would say maybe dance battles might be a joint area where you can have it both. But through our conversation, we actually had a Barbie.
We talked about that last night.
But I think, in the case of Adobe, we do set our own, because our brand, we support artists, but in the same time, our Photoshop is used by education kids too, and we wanted to have at least the first versions of our models be more generally usable, PG to some extent, instead of making them fully powerful. And we did set a set of guardrails. Besides those types of guardrails, there are also bias removal techniques we've applied. For example, in the case of Firefly, if you search for a doctor, we don't give you back the stereotypical white male, gray-haired, Caucasian person. We actually try to look at the country of origin of your request, and we give you both gender diverse, age diverse, and skin tone diverse responses to match the population in your country of origin. So we try to debias our model intentionally just to make it not perpetuate potentially harmful stereotypes, which is another type of guardrail we've decided to introduce just to make our model more inclusive.
Very good point. If my 4 and 7-year-old girls were in the audience, that Barbie reference would really register with them. I've seen it 3 times already, and for those of you who are Barbie fans out there, I feel for you. Maybe one last question for you guys here. Both of your organizations are kind of in the forefront of these emerging technologies. If you can think of one recommendation or one key lesson that you have learned throughout your journey when it comes to incorporating further governance and further controls into responsibly using and developing these technologies, what would you share with the audience as that lesson or a key recommendation?
I would say there's been a lot of conversation about the existential threat of AI. And this generally goes along the path of Terminator and AI taking over and destroying humanity. I would ask you to consider the more immediate existential threats to people, to groups of people, to genders, to races, to religions. This gets to the point that you were talking about bias. If we create AI that disparately treats one group tremendously in favor of another group, the group that is disadvantaged or disenfranchised, that's an existential threat for that group. And so I would ask you to rethink how you think about what an existential threat is today. Not 10 years from now or 20 years from now or whenever robots take over and kill us all. But how your customers and your communities are interacting with AI right now and next week and next year, and what we can do to improve that experience for everybody so that there's a fairer playing field with how AI affects all of our lives. I would ask for a different definition of existential threat.
Thank you, and I agree with you completely, and we're doing some of that, but we're doing as much as we can. To answer your point, and this is all about what's the biggest risk about generative AI, I actually think that for all of you, the biggest risk of generative AI is not doing it. I actually think that any company and any function not using generative AI today in your business or in your job, it is like refusing to use the internet or a computer. It's like the new digital literacy. So I strongly encourage you to put in balance the risks and the governance required to the generative AI right, but understand that, at least in my opinion, the biggest risk is not doing it, because then your whole company might become irrelevant or just disrupted by nimbler, faster moving, more productive, more creative businesses that will run circles around you. So embrace it. It's a technology. I think humanity will find a way to tame it to our best interest, hopefully. But the way to do it is to actually do it and not avoid it.
Both great points. And before I thank our panelists here for being with us, a quick shameless plug. Throughout 2024, Deloitte will be tracking how generative AI is impacting business and society, including how prepared executives feel to address risk and governance around generative AI adoption. So on January 15, we will launch our first wave of insights from our quarterly State of Generative AI in the Enterprise Report. So you can sign up to be one of the first to receive this report if you're interested. The QR code that you see up there on the screen would allow you to register for it and be the first one to receive that report. With that said, Alexander, Nikki, thank you so much for your insights and being with us here. And thank you for the audience for attending our session here. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.